Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we'll have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. Before I introduce our guest and topic for today, however, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I'm back home, Jason. Hooray.
You look so well rested and positive.
I'm living in a house full of boxes, but at least I'm sleeping in my own bed. So, yeah.
Yeah, massive improvement over the temporary living accommodation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, feeling more positive than I was last week.
I can tell. No, Joelle has a definite spring in her step today. So look, I'd now like to introduce our guest for today. We believe unions will play a large role in shaping the future of psych health and safety. So today we have our first and hopefully not our last union representative. He's currently serving as the Chief of Staff at the Maritime Union of Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Jake Field.
G'day, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and pick up on that point that you made about being the first union member or union official to be on the podcast. And I think it's, there's so much value in this platform to spreading a message of positivity around any subject, but something so important as psychological health and safety. It's a wonderful opportunity to put out multiple sides of the story about how we tackle the impacts of psych health and safety. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, look, Joelle and I believe there's just so many people that will play a role in getting companies to take a more of a systemic approach to employee mental health. And unions are one of them. Org psychs, we've featured quite a bit. Health and safety representatives, we're getting more and more on. The academics, I guess, that shape our understanding of concepts and whatnot, regulators. So there's just so many people that need to work together for this to work effectively. So really stoked to finally get a union voice on here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a collaborative approach, obviously, and like any good outcome is driven through collaboration, cooperation, and all the other Asians, and consultation, and you can't have that without having multiple voices and people at the table, So, yeah, I think from that perspective, it's a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Jake. Before we get into anything too serious, tell us about your favourite podcasts.
Well, the Psych Health and Safety podcast has quickly become one of my favourites, and it's heavy subject matter, and not in terms of that it's undigestible, but it requires you to really put some focus and expand your preconceived ideas, perhaps beyond the horizons of those preconceptions to a new way of thinking about work health and safety from a psychological impact perspective. And so it does demand a level of attention and focus that some other light-hearted podcasts don't. But when I think about the list of podcasts I listen to, they're all in the same vein, I suppose. And I've really got into Simon Sinek. A Bit of Optimism is the name of his podcast, and it's a bit sporadic when he releases them. The Guardian, Australian Politics, and the U Project. I don't know if you've ever heard of the U Project by a guy called Craig Harper out of Melbourne. Really practical, has a great range of guests on topics from diet to, mental health to, inspirational type, people who have overcome adversity, just a wide range of topics for all punters. And I guess that'd be my sort of 3 or 4. That are go-tos. I spend a lot of time in the car, Joelle, so podcasts are my go. I really enjoy them. Yeah.
Yep, good. They're definitely good to have on hand for driving and helping to keep people awake on those long drives. So hopefully we're helping to potentially avoid some fatigue-related traffic incidents as well. Keeping your mind active on those drives. All right, Jake, let's hear about your professional career.
So it's been varied. I left high school, probably before I should have, and couldn't really see any other avenue, but following my, family and my father into a job in the maritime industry. I wanted to go away to sea, and that sort of didn't happen immediately. I spent a bit of time on the waterfront, and eventually, as a young man, got away as a merchant seafarer. Moved into the offshore oil and gas industry, and in that time, I guess I developed a broader education than what school had provided, through working with other working class men and women, and getting a perspective of the world that, especially being a merchant seafarer, I travelled extensively and seen, other cultures and the types of oppressive working conditions that particularly other seafarers internationally were dealing with. And, that really sparked something in me, a sense of compassion and camaraderie with other workers, and particularly workers who were, treated poorly around the world. And I wanted to do something about that. And, I came into the union movement at a young age. I was a member of the MUA at 16 years old, and at 23, I became an elected official. And spent a couple of years, a term, in fact, 4 years as an elected official, and then went back into the industry. And during that time, I've held some roles in work health and safety. I worked in the construction industry, high rise, heavy construction for quite some time, and worked as a health and safety advisor and coordinator on some fairly big projects, and came back into the maritime industry in the offshore oil and gas construction, where I'd spent a bit of time before I'd left the industry to go ashore. And some opportunities presented themselves for me to use the skills and attributes that I've got to really represent workers and bring a different perspective in a really progressive organisation, which the MUA is. And I ended up, in a work health and safety and training role within the MUA until recently, where I've transitioned into the chief of staff role that Jason introduced. So, it's been fairly varied. I've had a really good opportunity to traverse the heavy blue collar industry on both sides of the work health and safety fence, I suppose, from a coordinating safety advisor type role to being an on the job safety rep, and that's really played into and developed, I guess, where I've ended up now, and why I suppose I'm on here and talk and have such a passionate interest in psychological health and safety, and eliminating the risks to that. Through really robust mitigation strategies that I think, are, they're fundamental to workers' health and safety, just as fundamental as, manual handling or any of these other things that we've sort of, been introduced to over the years. So I guess, just briefly, that's my sort of career progression, I suppose, or regression, depends which way you want to look at it. But yeah, I've had the benefit of the school of knockabouts and seagoing lawyers and the other wonderful characters that have helped to educate me and get me to where I am now. I certainly haven't done it on my own, that's for sure.
Good stuff, Jake. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about the MUA then, Jake. Who do you serve? What's your membership base look like? Where are they located? Yeah,
so look, our membership's quite diverse. I mean, we're talking, when we talk about the modern MUA, which is an amalgamation of essentially the Waterside Workers Federation and the Seamen's Union of Australia, two organisations with a long, proud history of, progressing not only the rights of workers, but the social, political and industrial well-being of workers and of the community. And when you look at a lot of the things that people take for granted in society, I mean, those things were driven by working class people and the organisations that they willed into existence, i.e. trade unions, and particularly those two unions, the Seamen's Union, the Waterside Workers Federation. I mean, some of the first industries to have superannuation, their own financial institutions, work health and safety systems and policy, and have that into legislation that benefits all workers. So look, we're a small organisation, to be quite honest, and as you've probably seen or read in the media, we amalgamated into the broader CFMMEU as a division in 2018, which is obviously targeted towards maximising the capacity of our union to advance the interests of our members and of workers generally, regardless of whether they're in a union. So, we're an organisation that's always punched above its weight, and been proud to do that, but also humbled by, the fact that we are able to, to lead in a constructive and meaningful way, outside of our own space. And sure, there's some, we're maligned here and there, and that's okay. That's part of the rough and tumble of progressing the interests of workers against, what is fairly aggressive capital in the main. But for the 13 or 14,000 members that we've got, it's vitally important that their organisation takes up the fight in the struggle in all aspects of their working lives. And there's no more important aspect of their working life than their psychological, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. And I think our organisation has understood that for a very long time. It's a male-dominated environment. All those machoisms that get tossed around about wharfies and seafarers, but and we don't just have wharfies and seafarers, I might add, as members. It's as a broader church as you can imagine across the maritime sectors. But in the main, it's male dominated, and even that in itself has been a focus of our industry and of our union to advance our union through gender inclusion and equity and balance, and those things go to the psychological health and safety of people, of workers, and all the things that come along with that. The domestic violence situations that so many people find themselves in, and being progressive in that space to really campaign hard and have robust, domestic violence provisions and clauses within our enterprise agreements that are supported by our entire membership, over the wage claims, over the condition claims, really understanding that those are the types of things that impact workers' lives more than, did they get a pay rise, or do they have to work how many midnight shifts in a row? If you can't find refuge, support, and safety within your industry, within your workplace, and within your union from, the abhorrent treatment that humans inflict on each other, and you can't come to your union for that type of support, then we might as well pack up and give it all away. And so I'm proud to be an MUA member, and I always have been, and proud to be an MUA official. Because despite what's reported in the news, and as you know, and it's across every aspect, whether it be politics, whether it be religion, whether it's the military, trade unions, there's always a deeper story, and there's always those things that organisations are doing that doesn't get reported on, that are wonderful and enrich people's lives, and I think our organisations, plural, have done that for many generations.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you are doing amazing work, and we do love little organisations that bat above their average. So, well done.
Yeah, case in point, yeah.
So, you've mentioned your interest in psychological health and safety a couple of times already. So, what got you interested in the area?
I think, look, I'm a human being. I've had my struggles, and they're just part and parcel of walking on this planet. I think, the things we're exposed to, our upbringing, nature versus nurture, what I've experienced in my life, and I probably didn't make the connection between where work fitted into that, and how not only the poor design of some of the work that I've done which has been historic and generational and specific. It's been that way for a reason, but I probably wasn't aware so much of the impacts, the psychological impacts of work until I experienced outside, life struggles, and had to try and countenance, that within a workplace that wasn't necessarily as accepting or as understanding, probably is the right word, as it could have been. And I just mentioned before about how wonderfully progressive we are and all those sorts of things. But I can remember going to work and working away at sea and having a couple of things going on in my life and mentioning it to somebody, and they said to me, "Oh, look, son, don't bring your problems to work. That this isn't the place for them." And I distinctly remember where I was. Even down to, what I was wearing at the time, thinking, well, I'm stuck on this ship for the next however many months with you guys, all day, every day. Where else am I meant to take these problems? And that resonated and I've ruminated on that for years afterwards. And I think, that specific moment, along with a few other little elements that feed into it, was really the catalyst for me to think, well, work should be a supportive place. Work should be, work is a refuge for people, but the type of work and the way work's structured and the demands and intensifications also are contributing factors, significant contributing factors to often our experiences outside of work, and how we filter them and how we cope with them and how we seek help. And I guess those seeds were planted a long time ago. And as I got more involved in the work health and safety space and realised that it's not all about slips, trips and falls. It's not all about manual handling and wearing the right PPE. I guess the penny started to drop. And I don't think you should never give up learning, right? And even by listening to the podcast that you guys produce, I'm constantly picking up elements that feed into those base understandings that I have, which then expand into well, how can we make this better for workers? And how can we get everybody who's involved in work, employers, governments, and workers and their organisations to really focus on psychological health and safety as the new 8-hour day, basically.
Yeah, no, I think it's fantastic how you've been able to broaden your view from that traditional health and safety focused on more of the physical hazards in the workplace. Yeah. Go, hey, look, this is a logical extension of what I'm already doing. And we're really hoping that other health and safety professionals will see that and try and plug that knowledge gap and competency gap. And hopefully the podcast continues to go a bit of that way to educating people and bringing up that level of understanding.
Absolutely.
I think it's great that you, the way that you reacted to that, that key moment in your life. I guess that's one of those sort of sliding doors moments, where you could have just gone, well, throw your hands in the air, accept defeat. This is just the way that the industry is, and I just have to accept it and bottle things up and compartmentalize. And you chose to go the other way and think, well, no, that's not right. What can I do about that? Yeah. I love hearing those kinds of moments, key moments in people's lives that you can actually sort of pinpoint that, yeah, that was the moment when I started down this particular path. So that's a great story, Jake. Thank you for sharing that with us. What's your view of the role of unions in the psych health and safety space?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because I think it's more than just holding, people to account and holding employers to account. And I think that is what, potentially people see as unions' traditional roles and what the members see. And, it plays into that narrative, of the us versus them. And, in many areas where we're involved as a union, it is us versus them, unfortunately. As much as we'd like for it to not be, it is. But I think in the space of psychological health and safety, I think we've got a social, industrial and moral responsibility to drive change through the mechanisms and the unique mechanisms that we've got available to us that many other social groups don't have. Your local country women's association or your local benevolent society don't have the same impact and the same inroads into government and real change-making agencies that trade unions have got, and certainly that the MUA and the broader CFMMU have got. So I think it really is about driving change through those mechanisms and being part of a formulation of consultative process that includes all of those areas, and using our voice in that space of positivity rather than focusing on those lag type indicators, which are after something's gone wrong, in comes the union and says, you're all naughty boys and you shouldn't have done this, and now we're going to head off to some legal jurisdiction. I think there's more to it than that, and I really think unions have, and particularly through the ACTU and our union as well in particular, have moved into that space where it's more pragmatic and it's more practical, and it's more about saying those other differences, political and industrial, aren't the focus here. This focus is on human beings and on workers who are not only productive for the employer, but they're part of a broader society, and we've got an obligation not to damage them and then send them back out into the world and say, oh well, it's the world's job to deal with them now. And I think that's where unions are uniquely positioned to be able to to pull some of that collaborative approach together and really drive it, because we have got a substantial voice and a different voice. So I think it's incumbent upon us to use that.
Yeah, and I think a great example of that, Jake, is where you and I worked together while I was previously at NOPSEMA, and sort of responding to the emerging COVID situation, and actually having, yourselves and other union representatives, as well as industry, as well as the regulator, all meeting on that regular basis to sort of bring forward issues that were happening as you started hearing about them, so that we were able to then all collectively take proactive action. I think was a really good example of how that proactive and collaborative effort can yield really positive results.
Yeah, and I think that is a prime example of that, Joel. That's unique, right? And not only us and the regulator, for the operators as well in the offshore oil and gas space. There's a hostility around the share of wealth in that industry. And there's hostility around the share of distribution of wealth in every industry, but no more so than in the resource sector. And I think to bring that sort of tripartite forum together and actually have it mean something, and we started with that work health and safety forum, and it expanded into something meaningful for working people, which was the offshore mental health working group, which is unique and nuanced, specifically around the offshore oil and gas industry, but really has a flow-on effect for all workers. It's a bit of a beacon, I felt, of a bit of a beacon of hope that people could come together and put all those other differences where they belong, not on the table of dealing with workers' health and safety. And I think, we did that quite successfully, and we continue to do that. And even after, you've moved into the space you're in now, Joel, I think it's incumbent upon us also to be able to recognise the valuable contribution of people like yourself who came in and then aren't in that space now, and really do something to honour that contribution, so that it's not just a waste of people's time. Like, we tried our best, but bad luck. Someone else can deal with it. I think, going back to Jason's earlier question about what do unions do? Well, we fight, and it's incumbent upon us to keep fighting, not with not with others, but for others, and on behalf of workers, and bring whoever we can into and mobilize whatever we can to make it, psychologically safe for workers.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction, not fighting with, but fighting for. I think that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, your membership obviously works for a number of different employers around Australia, and you obviously would talk with a lot of them and observe, I guess, what their practices are. So what do you see employers currently doing well in the maritime industry in relation to psych health and safety?
I think, that's a good point. I think that they've recognised that there's a problem, and you can't, what are the tenets of risk management really are, assessment and recognition, understanding there's a problem first. And I think they've done that in the main. The difficulty is then having it translate into meaningful action, and agreed meaningful action through consultation and cooperation. But I think, when we're talking about an industry like the maritime industry, and if we specify into offshore oil and gas, it's a big industry. It's dynamic, probably one of the most dynamic. It's transient, it's got all the elements that like the fire triangle, if you add them all together, you're going to get it. You're going to get a bad outcome. And, COVID probably brought us to a space that we were maybe 5 or so years away from. It really crystallized, I think, for everybody that, something needs to change here. Unfortunately, it took COVID, but that's a negative. And I think, the positives have far outweighed the negatives in terms of the preparedness to respond on behalf of the industry. Whereas when we've talked about the industry before, it's always been the industry and its productivity and the money it makes, and it's people who generate that productivity and that wealth. And so I think, there's been a preparedness to really, by employers, to look at the totality of the industry response, so that workers are protected, so that the industry can continue. I mean, we're in unions because we got jobs. We don't want to not have industries. I don't want to not have a job. I don't want our members to not have jobs, because then their union wouldn't exist. So we are primarily focused on ensuring that our industries are buoyant, and I think employers probably came to that realization during COVID, and that's been a key contributing factor, I think, to why I'm here talking to you now, and why there'll be resonance in the psych health and safety space moving out of COVID. And whatever the COVID normal is will include, I think, in my view, an integration of psych health and safety into the terminology of and the vernacular of employers everywhere, and a lessening of those ignorant safety management systems that were only primarily focused on, the physical aspects. I think that's what is starting to be done well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Even though there was some great work occurring in this more systemic health and safety management system type approach to psych hazards before the pandemic, I really feel that despite all the negatives that the pandemic has brought, it has probably advanced our cause a good 3 to 5 years with the intense focus on mental health.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned, you've seen some examples of risk assessment and some consultation. You did say that perhaps maybe the follow-up actions could be improved. Is that the main area of improvement you see for employers in the maritime industry, or are there other areas for improvement as well?
Yeah, I think a commitment to the follow-up, that it's part of, it's part of a holistic approach to dealing with, all aspects of health and safety. It's not just about identifying and putting in, you know, I guess, strategies or risk minimization, factors that aren't fit for purpose. It really has got to be, that follow-up has got to include the consultation, and it's got to include, constant review and all those things that are part of part of a good safety management system. But I think, the follow-up, because what you see and what I've noticed happen is, something happens, the new thing comes out, it gets applied, and then we just continue to use that until, the edges are frayed and it's got holes in it, and it no longer works anymore. But it's just cheaper than putting an effort into replacing it or constantly updating. And I think that, this space is going to evolve, right? And even, even after COVID, and as you said, Jason, the 3 to 5 years, in 5 years' time, it'll be different again. And we'll need to apply different strategies, and there'll be different metrics and different sort of numbers that come out indicating, where things have gone up and down. And I think it's that preparedness to continually adapt and drive that, change as the space changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuous improvement is vital.
Sorry, I went the long way around saying continuous improvement.
But you're absolutely right. You first of all, you start with risk assessment, then you put in your interventions. You have to do that follow-up work if you hope to improve. But I often do see that employers, and it is still early days, I think, with employers embracing psych health and safety. But I'm still not seeing that next cycle around. Oh, we've done psych health and safety because we did the people at work survey. That's it, right? Like, we're done. So I think that definitely needs to be that commitment to follow up work and then revisiting it and then continuously improving. So I really hope in 5 years that companies are a lot more mature in terms of their systems and approaches to how they do psych risk management.
Yeah. And which is exactly what you guys are, achieving and progressing through your organisation is a more, robust focus on those systems, and so they do meet the challenges and the constant improvement needed.
So we'll talk a little bit more about consultation, because that's, I think, the piece that we see as the most critical to a successful psych health and safety management system and an integrated system. Anybody can run a survey and get people to tick the boxes of the hazards that they think are the most significant. But that's really only the first step in the process. You get responses saying, all right, well, these guys are experiencing high levels of stress. That doesn't lend itself to a useful solution. That's, we'll give them stress management training or resilience training. You then need to go back and actually consult further with that work group and say, well, what are the sources of the stress? And that's when you actually get to those meaningful solutions. And then, as Jason was saying, going back around again and consulting after you've implemented some solutions and saying, has that worked? What have been the unexpected consequences of that? So delving a little bit more into that consultation, and I know obviously for unions, consultation is something that you guys are always heavily involved in. What advice can you offer employers?
That'll get deep.
That's all right. We don't mind getting deep.
We've got a long format podcast, mate. So
I think it's the key. I think it's and I don't sort of say that flippantly, but how do look, if you take the experiences in any other industry around a physical hazard, where they're buying the same windows to put in the building, they keep breaking, people keep hurting themselves, they keep having LTIs and work cover injuries, and eventually they get to the point where either the too many windows have been broken and cost them too much money, or too many people are on compo and it's costing them too much money, and they come back and say, what's wrong here? We don't want to change anything, but it's costing us money. What's wrong? And workers will tell you, well, you keep buying us these crappy windows and we can't fit them, and the design process is wrong, and you need to go back and start at the beginning and have a look at the design and see whether you can change that stuff. And I think that's when, that motivation comes in economically, to start saying, okay, well, we need to make changes, and those changes flow on, and then you get Australian standards and you get design regulations and all those things, and no longer do you have that type of physical hazard. And I think, we're starting to get there in the psychological health and safety space, where the difference is that people are, and this, I don't like to use this word, but it probably fits here. People have the potential to be irreparably damaged, more than just a cut finger or a dropped object on their foot or something else, for which major design changes have been initiated in the past. For the smallest things, massive change has occurred. In the psychological health and safety space, people who are psychologically unwell take their own lives sometimes. They're irreparably damaged. Their families are damaged. Generational damage is done within communities where people are there, where their psychological health and safety isn't given the priority that it deserves. And I think the only way for that to change is to talk to the workforce, the broad Australian workforce, from white collar, right down to the bottle washer, and really understand what are the things that are impacting people's psychological health and safety. Because there's so many factors, and yes, it's social media, and it's financial, and it's wages have stagnated, and there's no jobs and all those things. But I sincerely believe that there is a quadrant in this equation that isn't really looked at properly, and that is the damage that's done to people at work that they then take back out into their communities, and that then generates the pebble in the pond. The ripples have far greater effect. And I think that's where the consultative process has a real opportunity to work and do the work that it's designed to do within the work health and safety legislation and all the other pieces of law that tell employers and workers that they have to consult. I think that's where consultation has its greatest benefit, is that the lasting change that we've seen across things that have really had minor impacts have an opportunity to change the world here, like to change the working world. And all you've got to do is talk to people and take on board what they say, and maybe even work cooperatively with them to put some things in place to ensure that we do have a better working world. And I think, consultation is one aspect of it. Sure, there's more, but it starts there. We've assessed it, and we talked about that before. We've assessed that there's a problem. What do we do next? If we just go and apply controls that we haven't consulted on, how do we know they fix anything? And I think for me, it's such a nothing sort of term, consultation, but it has it has just such a vast impact. And trying to bring everyone into the space where they understand what it means is probably going to be the key to really embedding this sort of stuff and making it work, for working people.
Jake, you've done a really good job, I think, of describing the complexity.
It is complex, right?
Yeah, involved in mental health, and that ripple effect that it has, and the intertwining of work life and personal life and economic factors and those other sort of macro factors, and it all compounds. But yeah, that doesn't take away from the obligations and duties of the employer and their contribution to that overall state of health for people. Absolutely.
Yeah. So getting down to the grassroots, like you say, and really understanding work through the worker's eyes is so important if we're going to make meaningful change. What about at a higher or more strategic level? Have you seen any good examples of that happening in industry?
Well, I come back to the example that Joelle offered before through that mental health working group that we're involved in, and that's just one such example. I mean, look, we've got our own employee assistance provider that was, the MUA was fun, I guess instrumental in starting, along with employers, some employers and other areas, and that has allowed us to have a vehicle into conversations that perhaps we wouldn't have been in traditionally, because it would have been considered more industrial, and this is more well-being based. And look, I've got my own views on EAPs and where they fit and all that sort of stuff. But what it has done, as I say, is give us that vehicle to get into conversations that, I guess allow a strategic approach to managing and first identifying that we need to manage psychological health and safety. Whereas I think if we were coming at it traditionally, and again, COVID has changed this, and our mental health working group is a pointed example of how COVID has changed this. But if we go prior to 2019, unions getting involved in those conversations potentially had all the obstacles of this is some, veiled industrial campaign, and they've latched onto psych health and safety, and that's their new vehicle to extract more money out of us. And I think having the ability to have professionals in the space, understanding our industry, understanding the needs of employers and employees has really had started that ball rolling, I guess, Jason, is what I'm getting at. And we were able to have that through our involvement with our employee assistance provider, because obviously, we had a high level of expertise within that organisation and people that were subject matter experts who could take us to a space that with the credibility that is needed when you start having these conversations. Post 2019 and into 2020, we're now seeing, because we're dealing with this pandemic that is just, in my view, highlighting an epidemic that was already there in terms of psychological injury and the suicide rate and people's, poor mental health. I think, what it's done, what COVID has done for that is allowed this a strategic approach to be fundamental, and employers and regulators and others are looking to that strategic level of involvement to solve these problems. And so, if COVID's done anything, I think it's put that on the radar. It's put the need for a strategic approach to be, paramount, rather than it to be singled out to people who've been to university and are considered to be the experts in the field, and leave it to us and we'll fix it up for you and we'll let you know how it goes. We've really brought it to a more strategic approach, I suppose. And I guess it depends on your idea of what strategic is, but I think it's it's about having a plan, and it's about identifying all the factors and having a plan to do something with them with every disposable resource that you've got. That to me is strategy, thinking your way through it, projected outcomes, all that sort of stuff, and doing it, as I say, with all the resources available, which are unions and workers and the regulator and community groups. And I think we're moved to that space now, which is wonderful.
Yeah, there's many willing hands, I think, in this area. It's obviously very meaningful work to be involved in. And I guess the other strategic element that you've outlined there is, finding those people who are experienced, knowledgeable in this area and bringing them together for a common goal. So, yeah, it was a great example.
So have you got any? You sort of mentioned a few things that you've been involved in. Do you have any particular success stories that you can share with us?
Yeah, well, look, again, depends on your definition of success. But we one of the things that that we saw happen sort of pre-COVID with just generated out of people's experiences in a particular workplace in Newcastle, where they, again, male-dominated industry or sector of the industry, those guys recognised that there was some serious challenges that were going on within their workplace, that their workmates weren't reaching out for support to the EAP, to the employer, to anybody else but them on the job, and really took it upon themselves to understand why that was happening, what the work was doing and how that was impacting these people, and what they could go and do to be skilled up to be able to provide brief intervention and some assistance on the job. And they created their own rudimentary peer support initiative, linked it in with the employer, and the employer was instrumental in supporting it, linked it in with the employee assistance provider, and were really able to progress forward in understanding and being able to support their workmates who were just experiencing, the normal societal pressures and, financial issues, relationships, substance abuse, gambling, all those sorts of things, but in a really meaningful way, where they were no longer, relying on having to take a day off or pushing through it themselves. They had their peers to sort of help them through. And I think that was a really successful story of grassroots, identification and application to fixing an issue that, they saw was within their remit to be able to fix, which was the brief intervention part, where someone comes to them and says, I've got a problem, and you don't stand there and go, oh, that's nice, mate, don't bring them to work. They stood there and said, tell me about it, and I've got some training, and I care about you, and we're going to do some things to help you so that, you're a functional member of this workplace and a functional member of your community, and so that the employer doesn't have to bring to bear the types of consequences that have befallen other workers in other workplaces where they haven't been able to clearly articulate what their issues are and how a treatment plan should, be initiated. And again, the employer were terrific in that space, because they were looking to understand, why do we have to deal with these issues when they've become HR issues, where there's so many other steps beforehand where we could have actually got involved and done some meaningful treatment. And it doesn't have to be us. We don't have to be the HR department didn't have to be the ones initiating. It was okay that the workers did it, and I think that's a really great example, of a success story, I suppose. And that lingers on, and it's still there in that workplace, and it's had a great impact.
That's I think a great example of, again, the importance of consultation and actually getting, that I think when you see those grassroots initiatives, often they're the most successful and they have the most impact, because they really do have that ownership at, across the organisation at that frontline level, rather than being viewed as, oh, this is just something that management's doing to cover their own backside. So again, I think emphasising the importance of really good, robust, comprehensive consultation with the workforce, not just to get token buy-in, but actually, getting them to come up with or contribute to the solutions and have ownership of those solutions and really carry it forward.
Morning tea or a box of fruit every Monday, or a stress ball, it was something that it was something the employer said, well, we know we've got an obligation and we're searching for remedies, but we want to hear about this and we want to see how this can work in our workplace because it benefits everybody here. And I think that, as you alluded to with the consultation, consultation isn't just walking out of your office and saying, well, let's have a talk about this thing, this idea that I've got to tell you how to do what I want you to do. Consultation is my door's open and you've walked through it and given me an idea that I didn't have before. And now we're going to talk about it. And now I'm going to do whatever I can within my remit to ensure that it goes somewhere and delivers something, whatever that might be. Sorry to cut you off there, Joel.
Oh, no, that's all right.
Yeah, no, Jake, I think you've outlined so beautifully today your personal passion for psych health and safety, some of the early steps that you're seeing some employers do. But what are your vision? What's your vision for the future of psych health and safety? Clearly, it's got a long way to go. It's not the popular approach like the fruit bowls and yoga that you just referred to.
Yeah.
So, where do you want it to head?
But even that's something, right? Like there was an identification that something needed to be done. We've probably applied the wrong control, and thinking that a banana every Monday morning is going to, take away all your woes. But I think probably my hopes would be around getting to the point where psych health and safety is understood to encompass the totality of health and safety, and it's not. When we talk about health and safety now, it's like when you say you're sick, people understand, oh, well, that means some sort of physical ailment. But more and more, when people say they're sick, they understand that could also mean psychologically, and that is not necessarily a stigma. And you don't have to ring up and tell your boss that you've got gastro. You can ring up and say, actually, I'm experiencing some adverse effects from work, or I've got some issues from outside, and I need to go and seek some help, and I'm having a mental health day. Yeah, that's in inverted commas. So I think that would be my vision, would be that that I guess everyone in the health and safety space become as cognizant of the psychological impacts of work as they are about the physical impacts, and that we don't even have to separate it anymore. We don't even have to call it psychological health and safety. It's just health and safety. And I think, we can get to that space through what you are doing, in your organisation, through, so many other wonderful initiatives out there to raise that, not only awareness, because everyone says that, we're raising awareness, but to really raise the level of education and skill around how we deal with the impacts of psychological health and safety. Because having awareness is wonderful. You haven't got the tools to actually do anything about it, or you don't really understand that there are tools available at your disposal. Having all the awareness in the world isn't going to help anybody. It's probably going to turn more people away from doing anything than anything else. So I think not just bringing awareness to it, Jace, but bringing a high level of skill to everyone involved in the control of psych health and safety, hazard and risk would be my vision, I suppose. Just as much as it is now, 25 years after I did my first manual handling course, and I still bend over and pick up a box and think, bend your knees, bring the load close. Those things are ingrained. You've done those courses. You know those things, and I think that would be my vision, is that when people are dealing with these issues, they deal with them the same way they go to pick up a box, where that loop just plays in their mind,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. What you're really talking about is competence, and it's something that Joelle and I talk about as being one of the key gaps. There's so many, risk management professionals out there, org psychs and all the rest, but they don't necessarily have all of the pieces of information put together, and also the confidence, I guess, to execute. So it's about raising that initial competence through education, and then just practicing it, right? Like, you're not going to become a psych health and safety expert overnight, but it's actually just going through the consultation process, risk mitigation process, measuring process, all those sorts of things, and people become more and more confident. And as you say, hopefully the desired future state that they do it without thinking in the future.
Yeah, and for me, it's no different than the first aid certificate. I mean, you don't have to be a paramedic to be able to stop the bleeding. Apply a bandage, do some resuscitation. These things that keep people alive, keep them safe and healthy. And so You don't have to be a clinical psychologist or an org psych or any other high level psychological professional to be able to apply the bandage and stop the bleeding, for want of a better word, where people are experiencing psychological distress. And you also don't have to have that high level of experience and education to be able to identify the risks and hazards. You just have to have an advanced level of skill, and that's what we would say a first aid ticket is. It's an advanced level of first responsive skill, and I think that's where we need to get to in this space. That it's mandated, that it's a regulation, that you just can't go to work unless you've got an elevated level of skill around identifying and responding to psychological hazards and risks.
Yeah, I see that being a key differentiator between the psych health and safety approach and, say, the wellness approach. The wellness has always been nice to have, and you're going to have the same people putting their hands up every time to be involved in like the wellness type activities. But until it's mandated, hey, we know that stress occurs in this workplace, so we're at least going to give you some education to protect yourself. I think that's an important place to get to. Yeah.
So, Jake, we hope that there are lots of professionals out there who are keen to get involved in this area of work and see it as a value add, because we certainly do. What words of advice and wisdom do you have for these people?
I think it's a good opportunity to get in on the ground floor, as they say. It really is an emerging movement towards making impact in reducing the risks and the outcomes of poor psychological health and safety work design, those types of elements. And I think it's as impactful, and I mentioned it before, I think it's as impactful as the 8-hour day was in modern terms. And all those years ago, what was it, 1856, when people realized that if I'm at work all day, every day, I can't do anything else. I can't look after myself. I can't be a good father, husband, neighbor, contributor to society. But it just took a long time for that to go from the stonemasons in Melbourne to everyone across Australian workplaces to get, reduced working hours. And I think the level of scientific and even anecdotal knowledge that work health and safety professionals have got available to them now, it's fundamental that those people get involved in this space, because they are really able to drive the types of advancements that, that took workers to have to walk off the job all those years ago to get a shorter working day. I don't think we have to do that anymore. I think what we need is, again, a consultative approach, but a collaborative and cooperative approach between professionals in that work health and safety space that see that their skills are adaptable to psychological health and safety and controlling it, and that it goes hand in hand with the experience that they've already got. It's a perfect fit, and we're not talking about behavioural safety programs or those types. We're talking about the way work is designed and the way it impacts people's mental health, their psychological health. And I think without those people, if you're a safety professional listening to this podcast and you think that potentially they're not transferable skills, I would say that they are. You've got the distinct ability to be able to identify and implement controls to hazard and risk. And once you have a level of education and awareness and understanding around psychological hazards, you can apply those same mitigation techniques. The hierarchy of control, it's the same. And I think that they're the people that really in this space must apply the skills that they've got, because employers, organizations, unions look to those people, and they look to them as subject matter experts. And as I say, I think it is transferable, with the type of education and skill enhancement that you're providing through your organisation, and that so many other organisations provide. It's you know, it should be seamless, really.
Yeah, and it's about them seeking the right inputs into that risk assessment process as well. And actually, you know, you get input from engineers for engineering, you know, for engineering out hazards. You get input from your HR professionals and your mental health professionals for resolving psychological hazards. So it's the same process. You're just drawing in different professionals to help you identify those mitigations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Jake, that's been a fantastic discussion with you, mate. I think we know that with unions, union officials, the one thing they all have in common is they are concerned about the well-being of their member base. And that definitely came through in the conversation today. You're a very passionate individual, and great to have you on the show.
And I really appreciate it. It's you know, I don't take these sorts of opportunities lightly. I think, you know, if they're not well thought out, and you know, you don't convey a message of positivity, then really there's no resonance. And you know, I'd hit the delete button if someone came on my podcast and didn't have a positive spin on how, you know, all of us can work together to make this space, you know, and to make work as safe physically and psychologically as it can be. So I really appreciate you having me on today.
Yep. And like I said, you're the first union official, hopefully not the last. I think you've given us a refreshing view, really taking into account the needs of the worker and how, I guess, multiple parties can collaborate and consult together for positive outcomes in this space.
Thanks very much.
So that brings us to the end of the podcast, listeners. So don't forget, we do video these things from the Zoom conversations that we have with our guests, and you can catch that on the Flourish DX YouTube channel. Also, if you can't hack the long format, you probably won't be listening now, about an hour into this conversation, but we do publish little short clips, 2 to 4 minutes, on our Flourish DX LinkedIn page, and Joelle and I share them through our own LinkedIn profiles. Saying that, Joelle and I are way too active on LinkedIn, as you probably all know. So feel free to connect with us and indulge us with a bit more conversation with like-minded professionals. Jake, how can people find out more about the MUA and your own work?
Oh, well, read the Financial Review or look at the front page of the Australian. You'll hear all about us. Look, I think, you know, we're active across all those social media platforms as well, Jason. You know, Facebook. Not so much on Instagram or some of the, you know, we haven't got a lot of our members TikToking, but look, Facebook and through our website is probably the easiest way to follow us. And certainly this podcast, I mean, we'll share this as widely as we can, and encourage as many people to get involved in listening to the wonderful information that you guys provide, and also, you know, hopefully reaching out and wanting to be a part of getting that message out there more broadly in the community.
Yeah, we'll definitely be taking some recommendations for other guests from unions to have on the show from you, mate. So, thanks again. It's been fantastic. And to our listeners, we'll catch you next episode.